Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing about the classes and object solutions for the Hackerearth Python assessment held on May 12th. The first question was validity check. Shaker works in a telephone exchange. He was associated with the task to find the valid users and invalid users by validating the username and passwords of the users from the list. It was a very hectic task to do manually, so Shaker starts writing a code which first stores all the details of the users in the specified input format and checks if the user is valid or invalid by comparing the usernames and passwords from the records. Help Shaker to write the code as required. So we have to create a user class with the following attributes: name, phone number, email, username and password. So all the attributes are of string type. Then we have two methods. One method is encrypt and it is prefixed with a double underscore yes, and it is a private method. So this method should compress the password. Then we have another method validate. This will decompress the registered password and check if the entered password matches with the password that is stored in the records. The input format: the first line contains the number of records, and for each record we should read the name, phone, email number, username and the password. And the next line will be the number of queries. For each queries there will be a username and password. And output, we should validate the username. If the user with the password exists, then we have to print valid, else we have to print invalid. And main instruction, you have to implement this code using classes and objects concepts. So now let us dive into the solution. So I've already created a Python file and I will be using Eclipse PyDev IDE for solving the problems. So the first thing we have to do is create a user class. So in the question it was mentioned that you have to create a user class with the 5 attributes: name, phone number, email, username and password. So let us create a user class. So class user, and we need the initializer. So initializer, it is used for initializing the attributes of a class. It is also called as a constructor. Name, so you have name, phone number, email, username and password. Now we have to initialize the attributes of the class. So those on the parameters are dummy arguments, and those with self are the attributes of the class. Right, so we have created the constructor. Now next thing you have to do is encrypt method. So encrypt method should compress the password. So def double underscore encrypt. So it is a private method. So private methods in Python, they are mainly used within the class. So private method can be used or can be accessed from within the class only. So this method should compress the password. So they've asked us to compress the password. Now how can we compress a password? So to compress the password, we have to use a built-in library called zlib. So this zlib, it will compress the string. So let us try using zlib. So zlib has a method called compress, and it accepts 2 parameters. The second parameter is optional. So the first parameter is the data. So what we have to do, we have to compress the password. So in decrypt, first we have to pass the password. So it will have a parameter called password. So I'm just adding it as password there. So we have to compress the password and I'm going to return this. So return the compressed password, so that instead of directly assigning the password to the class attribute, we can compress the password and then assign it. So I'm going to change this code as self dot underscore underscore encrypt password, so that while creating an object itself, the password will be compressed and then stored in the attribute of the class, right? So here I'm invoking the encrypt method, and this encrypt method I'm passing the password that is given by the user. So this will be passed here, and this method will be invoked, and here I'm going to compress the password. And while compressing the password, you should not pass a string, it should be a byte. So to convert that, we have to invoke a method called encode. So encode is a method that is available in string. So password is a string, so you can directly invoke the method encode. So encode will convert a string into a byte, comma, and I told you it will, the compress method accepts a second parameter. So second parameter will be from 0 to 9. It is the level of compression. So if I give level 0, that means it is no compression. If I give level 1, that means it is a compression that is faster. Whereas if I give level 9, this will be the best compression, and the compression will take a little bit more time. So for now I'm going to give it as 1. So zlib, it has a method called compress, and it accepts two parameters. So one is the data to be compressed, and the second one is the level of compression, and minimum level should be 1 so that the actual compression takes place. The values can be given from 0 to 9. So if you are giving a 0, then it means no compression. So but we need our password to get compressed, so I'm giving it as 1. So more detailed explanation can be found in the Python documentation, right? So I'll be returning the compressed password, and I'll be storing it in the attribute of a class. So that's done with encrypt method. The next method is the validate method. So def validate. So validate method, it will decompress the registered password and check if the registered password are the same. So first let us decompress the password. So this method, validate method, should also accept a parameter called password, so that we can check whether it is same or not. So first let us decompress our password. So I'm going to use a variable called my password. So here again we'll be using zlib. So zlib dot decompress, you should decompress the password. So self dot password. So the encrypted password is stored in the attribute. So here while decompressing, you should use the encrypted password. So self dot password. And after decompressing the string, we have to decode it. So I'm going to decode it back to a string. Then we have to validate it. So if my password is equal to the password that is given by the user. So password. So if my password is equal to password, then we have to return a string called valid. Else we have to return invalid. Yes, so both the cases are correct. So that is how you implement this class. So the only thing is, since they have asked you to compress the passwords, you should use the built-in package that is available called zlib, and in zlib you have method called compress and decompress. And compress method, it accepts two parameters. One is the string to be compressed and the level of compression, and decompress, it accepts the compressed data. So the compressed data is stored in the attribute of the class, so hence I am passing here self.password, and this is the password that is passed by the user. So that's about this class. Now let us work on the test cases. So the implementation of the class is done. So the first line contains the number of records. So records is equal to, it is an integer value, so int of input of. Then for each records, read the name, phone, email, username and the password. So you have to read the values. So for each record, so for I in range of records, so for each record I have to create a user. So basically it is the user details that I am reading. So I have to read the name, phone number, the email address, the username and the password. So for each record you have to use this. So to store the users, we can create a list. So I'm going to create an empty list. So after creating the user, we can just append it to the list. So user list dot append of user, such that all the users get added to the list. Next line will be the number of queries. So queries is equal to, again, int of input of. So number of queries. Then for each query there will be a username and the password. So for I in range of queries, so for each query there will be a username and the password. So let it be uname. So uname is equal to input of, and pwd, that is the password. Okay, right. So we have to check whether the given username and password are valid. So for that we have to make use of the list of users. So for user in the user list, so the user list contains a list of user object. So here a single user, for user means it is an user object. So I can directly access the methods that are available in the user object. So now if user dot username, so I'm able to access the username directly because this user in the user list is an object. So here I'm appending the list with a user object, hence the values of the user list, the value stored in the user list is an object. So that is why I'm able to access it, and I am using the object. You can access the attribute. So user dot username equal to the given username. So if the user's username matches with that of the username given in the given by the user, then we have to check for the password, or we have to validate the password. So validate the password for this particular user. So user dot validate the password. So here the password is stored in pwd. So if we validate the user, this will return valid or invalid, hence I am going to use a print statement. Then since if the user is found, it will print the value and no need to iterate for each users, I can directly use a break statement. So why am I using the break statement? Because the for loop will be continuing unnecessarily even though the condition is matched. So if the condition is matched, I have to break the loop, so I am giving break statement here. So that's it. So we have completed the first problem. Now let us check whether it is working properly or not. So this is the question that was given, and this is the sample input. So let us use the sample input itself and check whether it is working properly or not. So I'm getting the output valid, valid and invalid. So let us go through the output. So the first line contains the number of records, so 3 records, followed by the user details. So this will be the first user, this is the second user, and this is the third user. So these 3 users are stored in the user list. And the next is the number of queries, so 3, which means we have 3 queries. So the 3 queries, and for each query there will be a username and the password. So user 935 and pass 978. So for user 935, the password should be pass 978. So let us check. User, yes, we have user 935 and the password is pass 978. Hence the output is valid. Next is user 935 and password 978, again the same username and password, hence it is valid. Then for user 476, the password is pass 298, whereas the password given here is 523, and hence I'm getting invalid. So the password does not match for the third user. So that's it for the first solution. So the only new thing you have learned today is you have to use zlib for compression. Right. Now let us take a look at the second problem. The second problem is a pretty easy one. It is a shopping cart. So Kumar is working in a mall. He is assigned with a task in which he has to directly deal with the customers and maintain their cart, either to add or search the items. He is finding it difficult to manage the customers manually. Let us help Kumar by writing a code through which he can manage the cart details of the customers easily. Write a Python code to get the details of n number of items and ask the user 3 choices. One is to add the item to the cart, search an item by ID, or exit. So if the user selects an option 1, then you have to add the item to a cart. So you should fetch the item details and add them to the cart. If the user selects the option 2, which means you are searching an item, then you have to ask the user to enter the item ID. And if the item is found, you have to display item found. Else you have to display item not found. And the third option, it is exit. So you have to exit by printing all the items that are present in the cart. Right. So we have to create a class called item with the following attributes: item ID, item name, company name, price of the item, rating. Note that the price of the item and rating are of double and float, and in Python there is no difference between double and float because double is not available, and hence we will be treating both price of the item and rating as a float. Then you have 2 methods, search and display. And search, it should perform search operation by ID, and display, it should display the item details. The input format, the first line contains n records, and for each record we have to read the ID, name, company, price and rating for the item. And the next line consists of q queries, and the queries will have either add. If the query is having the value add, then you have to read the ID, name, company, price and rating and add that item to the cart. If the query contains search, then you have to read the ID and perform the search operation. And the output format, you have to print, if the item is found, you have to print item found, else you have to print item not found. Again an instruction. This should be implemented using classes and object concept. Now let us take a look at the second solution. So this is the second exercise. So I have already created a Python file. Now let us create the class. So we have to create a class called item, and this class contains 5 attributes: item ID, item name, company name, price of the item, and rating. So def __ init self item ID, item name, company name, price of item, and rating. Now we have to assign the variables to the attributes of the class. So item ID, item name, company name, the price of the item, and finally the rating for the item. There, we have done with the constructor. The next is you have a method called search, and you should perform search operation on the items. So def search, and it searches by the ID. So you have a parameter called item ID because you have to perform search by ID that was given in the question. So you have to read the ID and then perform search by ID. So here it is pretty straightforward. So if my item ID, so self dot item ID matches with that of the given item ID, then I'm going to return true, else I'm going to return false. So if the item matches, then I'm returning is true, and if the item doesn't match, then I'm returning it as false. And the next question was display method. So display the item details. So def display, so I have to display the details of the item, and they haven't given any specific format to display the item, so hence I'm going to directly print the item details. So self dot item ID, and self dot item name, self dot company name, self dot price of item, self dot rating. So that's about it. So that is the implementation of the given class. So if this class, will be using it in our program. So this is the class. So here you have the class item, and I have created the required parameters, that is the item name, item ID, company name, price of the item, and rating, and I am assigning it to the attributes of the class. And in search, it is mentioned in the question, you have to perform search by ID. So it will have a parameter called item ID which will be given by the user. So if my object's item ID matches with that of the given user, then I'm returning it as true, else I'm returning it as false. And in display, since the display format is not given in the question, we are directly printing the details. Now let us check the input. So first line contains n records. So records is equal to int of input of. So I'm reading the number of records. So for I in range of records, so for each record you have to read the ID, name, company, price and rating. That is the basic details needed for an item. So you'll be creating an item object. So item object, and it needs 5 attributes. So input of for the name, item ID, item name, then the company name, then you have the price and the rating. So price and rating, as I said earlier, in Python we don't have double, so we'll be using float instead. Right, so we have created an item object. But again, in this problem also we will be having n number of items. So to store the n number of items, the question, it has mentioned that we have to store them in a cart. So I am going to create item cart, and I'm going to initialize with an empty list. So after creating the item, I'm just going to add this item into the cart. So item cart dot append of the item. So for each item, an item object will be created, and that object will be appended to the cart. Hence we'll have a cart full of items. And the next line consists of Q queries. So the next is queries. So queries is equal to, again it will be an integer, so I'm using the int function. And again for I in range of queries, for I in range of queries, each query will have a string value. See, add or search or exit. So let us read the query first. So this, right, if the query equal to add, so with a capital A, so that's how it is given in the question and in the sample output, so you have to use it in the similar way. So query, if the query is add, then you have to read the item details and store them in a cart. So I'm going to use this same code and I'm going to paste it here. Right, so if the query is add, you have to again append a new item to the cart. Elif, so in Python there is no else if, it is elif. So if the query is equal to search with a capital S, so search, we have to search the item by ID, and there are many items in the cart. So for each item in the cart, you have to check the item by ID, and before searching, since it is a search operation, you should read the ID from the user. So item ID is equal to input, and item ID is a string, so I'm directly using input. So for each item in the cart, so this item, again similar to the last problem, this item, it represents an item object. So again this item card contains a list of item objects. So item dot search with the item ID. So this item ID is what we will read from the user. So search item ID, and if you take a look at our search implementation, it is a boolean value. So if it is true, then the item is found. So I'm going to again use a condition here. So if item dot search of item ID, so that will do. So item dot search will return a boolean. So if it is returning true, it will become if of true, so that means the condition is true, or if of false, the condition is false. So directly you can use it in the if statement, no need to use a comparison like double equal to or not. So directly I'm going to use it because it is going to return a boolean value. So if item.search of item ID returns a boolean value, if it is true, then this condition is true. Then we have to print item found. And if the item is found, then you have to break away from the loop, because the loop will be exhausted. And if there is no item found in the list after the for loop gets exhausted, so this can be used in Python especially. So for clause, for loop can have an else statement, so that is why I'm giving it in the after for. So take a look at the indent. It is this else is not for the if statement, it is for the for statement, and this is a valid statement in Python. So else, if the loop is exhausted, that means there is no item found in my cart, then I am going to print item not found. That's it. So that's the search method. Now the final method is the third query. So the query might be exit. So if it is exit, then you have to display the items in the cart. So for item in item cart, item dot display. So this will invoke the display method for each item and it will get printed. So this is the third condition. So the first condition is if the query is add, then you have to create an item, new item, and add it to the cart. If it is search, then you have to read the item ID, then you have to search the entire cart to fetch the item. If the item is found, then print item found, and if the item is not found, you have to print item not found. And finally, if the option is any other as add, any other than add or search, then you have to display the item. Then that's it. Yes, so we have completed the solution for this question. So let us check whether our program works correctly or not. So I have already copied the sample input that was given in the Hackerearth assessment. So I'm going to run this as Python run. Let us open the console. Right, so my output is item found and item not found. Let us check it. So since the first line is 6, there are totally 6 items. So this is item 1, and this is item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5, and item 6. Then the next line is the number of queries. So we have 3 queries. First is search. So search, and the item ID is item 5. So let us check whether item 5 is there. Yes, item 5 is available, hence it is returning it as item found. Now the next query is add, so which means we have to insert an item to the list. So we are inserting item 5, Flipkart, pen 387, and rating as 4. And since there is no output to be displayed, it is not displaying anything here. And the last query is search, and it is searching for item 0, and there is no item with the ID item 0 that is available, hence the item is not found. So I believe you have understood the solution for both the questions, and make sure that you follow the guidelines that is given in the question and use classes and object concepts for implementing the solution. So thank you for the discussion.